Ultimately, the Spanish failed to create a meaningful presence in Texas. However, the attempted French settlement inspired them to take the region more seriously. Therefore, in 1690, they decided to establish missions. The pressing question, though, was, where would they be located? They considered along the coast, with the Atacapa as an option since supplying the missions would be easier. However, the Spanish regarded them as difficult to convert. The same could be said for the Carancahua. The Coahuiltecans were closer to Mexico City, but they were so materially poor that they could offer the Spanish very little. Their distance from French cities like Biloxi and Mobile also did not give the Spanish any geopolitical benefits. The only real option, then, were the Caddo. They were organized, wealthy, and closer to French settlements, offering the Spanish the ability to monitor them. In 1692, the Spanish established a mission among the Caddo. It was remote and isolated in relation to other Spanish settlements. They arrived with wagons, which the Caddo interpreted as an effort to trade. The Spanish camped outside Caddo villages and announced their intention to create missions and turn the Caddo into Spanish subjects. However, the Caddo believed the Spanish would stay for a month, trade, and then leave. They welcomed the Europeans, and missionaries reported that this friendliness was a promising sign. The initial success, though, did not last long. The Spanish did not leave after a month. It became clear that the Caddo were more interested in what the Spanish had to offer materially rather than spiritually. The traders quickly ran out of goods to exchange, and no one came for religious instruction. To make matters worse, a familiar pattern emerged. In 1693, a smallpox epidemic broke out, and the Caddo demanded the Spanish leave or face death. The Spanish buried the church bells and abandoned the missions. The first try to set up missions in Texas did not work out, mainly because the Caddo were not interested in becoming Spanish. They were the wealthiest in Texas. Why would they abandon their ways for Spanish ones? However, the French remained uncomfortably close to Spanish possessions. In 1718, the French established New Orleans, compelling the Spanish to return not for the region's great riches, but as a buffer between the French settlements and silver mines of Mexico. Like before the Spanish chose the Caddo as a base of operations, they went beyond the modern borders of Texas, establishing a presidio in western Louisiana, which ultimately became Texas's first capital. Ironically, it was in Louisiana, not Texas. On the surface, it seems that the Spanish were committing the same mistakes they made in the first round of missions. However, they concluded that one reason the first missions failed was that they were too remote and lacked material support. Therefore, they established a support network halfway between the missions and New Spain. This became the city of San Antonio. Eventually, the Spanish built 5 missions, one of which, San Antonio de Valero, became better known as the Alamo. These missions were larger than their modern versions. For example, the Alamo's popular image is just the facade of its chapel. Like the missions in New Spain, they were more like boarding schools, providing both religious instruction and vocational training. In addition to the missions in San Antonio, the Spanish returned to Matagorda Bay, the site of La Salle's failed settlement. They established a presidio that would be eventually moved to Goliad. This round of missions had the same record as the first. They did not get much done. The Caddo ignored their real purpose and instead just traded with the Spanish. The Spanish had a similar record with the Carancahua, as no one showed up. The only place where there were any meaningful results was in San Antonio with the Coahuiltecans. However, they were not there to become Spanish. Instead, they were more interested in the shelter and protection they could provide against Apache attacks. The missions became targets for the Apache, since they housed their enemy and had food, clothing, and horses that they could steal. The missions were also easy to attack because they were sparsely manned, since the Spanish did not want to invest many resources in Texas to begin with. The Apache raids were also a result of the arrival of another indigenous group, the Comanche, who broke away from the Shoshone and settled in the Texas plains. Like other Plains Indians, the Comanche used horses to follow bison herds and began entering Texas in the 1730s. Instead of sharing the land, the Apache and Comanche fought, with the Comanche gaining the upper hand. Both groups relied on bison for food and necessities, but the Apache also grew plants in small gardens, making them less mobile. The Comanche, on the other hand, raided Apache gardens and remained highly mobile. The raids intensified as the Apache were pushed out of the plains and closer to the Spanish settlements. to survive the conflict with the Comanche, who are also taking their resources. The Apache sought refuge near the Spanish. Despite the mission's lack of positive results, the Spanish persisted, partly because they had seen success elsewhere, and sometimes indigenous groups requested missions. They did so not to become Christians or Spaniards, but for the benefits missions provided, such as trade, food, shelter, and protection. The Spanish often misinterpreted these requests as genuine interest in becoming Spanish subjects. A notable example was the establishment of Santa Cruz de San Saba among the Apache, southeast of modern-day San Angelo. In 1757, the Apache, struggling in their war with the Comanche, approached the Spanish in San Antonio, claiming they would stop raiding Spanish possessions if a mission was established. The Spanish believed the Apache wanted to become Spaniards, but in reality, the Apache sought to draw the Spanish into their conflict with the Comanche. The Comanche, seeing the mission as an alliance, attacked it, bringing the Spanish into the war. After the Comanche attack, the Spanish concluded that Texas was not worth the cost and began to secularize the missions, beginning with the Alamo in 1793. The region held little value for the Spanish beyond serving as a buffer between themselves and other European powers. In North America, there was no gold, silver, or significant potential for converts. The Spanish shifted their policy toward indigenous peoples, resorting to bribery to prevent attacks. By 1800, the total Spanish population amounted to around 4,000. There were between 20,000 and 30,000 indigenous at the same time. Clearly, the Spanish were not in control of Texas.